Ever the academic with all the books in the background. Great to see.
You're assuming those are academic books. Mostly they're not.
You disappoint me. You disappoint me. What's on the shelf?
That is my quilting, gardening, sewing collection.
Well, that's even more impressive. More impressive. And John Wilson's got a lovely picture behind him. I was trying to work out where it is. John, do you want to tell us where it is? You'll need to unmute. John, you'll need to unmute.
It's Loch Lomond from Connachtkill.
Ah, right, okay. I could sort of work some of it out. I wondered whether Duncan and Jim could have worked it out. But you could have had a running a bet or something on that, John, and raised some money for people trying to work out where it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, fantastic. So welcome. We're talking tourism, we're talking the North Coast 500. And as always, for those of you that have never been to a cafe before, my name is Jenny Milne. I'm the founder of SRITC, and we've been going for about 2 years or so. And at the convention, if you weren't with us, we had a ta-da moment. We've got a new logo. So we're now getting a bit more identity, which is great. So that's on the right. And it's compulsory to have cake. So there's my cake. I've got it here. Now, some of you probably don't have cake, but you might have a biscuit or a cup of tea. It is a cafe. It is about being informal, and it's not a traditional webinar, as you can already tell. So without further ado, I'm actually going to introduce you to two guys that have had the short straw of seeing and speaking to me since about April with their work doing the Scottish Tourism Index. And if anybody can tell Jim where his background is, you'll be joining me in the club because I sprung him on his first time. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and I'm going to hand over to Jim and Duncan, who will then introduce Mike. So I will sit back and enjoy.
Thank you, Jenny. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Jim Eccleston, pleased to meet all of you. And yeah, I won't give away where my background is, but we can discuss that one later. But probably suffice to say that Duncan and I are both based down in the Edinburgh area, round about that sort of area. So that might give you some clues. We formed the company 56 Degree Insight just over a year ago. Both of us worked for Kantar for many years, doing lots of market research, primarily in tourism and travel and transport and all these sorts of areas. I previously worked for the Scottish Tourist Board, and that gives you an idea how long ago that was, because it was called the Scottish Tourist Board. I worked in their research department for 8 years. That was my first job from uni, and Duncan joined me there as well for a few years. So we both worked together for some time. We decided to form 56 Degree Insight because we wanted to get back close and personal with the stuff that we really enjoy doing most, which is tourism and outdoor recreation type research. And that's what we've been primarily focusing on since we formed 56 Degree Insight. Just a little bit of background on the Scottish Tourism Index. Early on in the pandemic, around about probably about mid-April, we realised that there wasn't really much information out there on how people were feeling about tourism and holidays. We were all in that sort of panic mode. We were all locked down. We weren't really thinking about tourism and holidays, and nobody else seemed to be doing any surveys or anything that were relevant for the Scottish population. So we decided that we would launch our own self-funded survey, which was going to be monthly, literally to get an idea of how Scots were feeling about tourism. And we had our first wave of that research at the beginning of May. We repeated it in early June. Then again, the week before tourism reopened, on the 15th of July, we ran the survey just a week before that. And then we ran the final wave of it, for the moment, certainly, at the end of August. And the purpose of that wave was to look back at the holidays that people had been taking. The survey was run online. We spoke to 500 people each time. We used Populous Data Solutions, a big consumer panel, to get the data. All of the data is representative of the Scottish population, the Scottish adult population. So it's all representative in terms of age, gender, socioeconomic grouping, and so on. Now, in the time it's available, obviously, we can't take you through all the results. What I will say, a couple of things. First of all, more than happy to share any of this in greater detail after the event. We obviously talk about it as well, but all of it is on our website, and the very last slide that we show before we hand over to Mike has got the web address where you can download all of the data. So you're all more than welcome to use that. Also, if anybody is really interested in this and would like to us to take it out to your own organisations and do a separate presentation, happy to do that as well. I mean, obviously at no cost. This is just something we feel it's useful to get in front of as many people as possible. Some of you may have seen some of these presentations already, because we've done several hundred or spoken to several hundred businesses over the summer period. So I can't cover everything today. Let me just see if I can just get this. There we are. But just to give you a flavour for what is covered in the survey, obviously the impact of COVID-19 on tourism and travel generally, both back in May in terms of how people were feeling and where tourism and travel was and transport issues were on their agenda. And then we tracked these feelings throughout the summer period. Then we probed on specific impacts, financial impacts within a holiday context, air travel, going overseas, health and safety considerations, and whether or not there was a desire to support Scottish tourism. We looked at the desire for holidays by destination and type of location. And then in terms of Scottish holidays, where they were thinking of going. And then in August, we looked at where they actually did go during the summer months. And then the impact of COVID-19 on things like their accommodation choice, things to do, eating and drinking out on holiday. Impact on transport choices. Duncan, I'm going to hand over to Duncan in a couple of minutes, and he's going to spend the last 5 minutes going over that particular topic, because obviously that's very relevant for this group. We also looked at the community impacts of tourism, in the months and weeks after lockdown, the extent to which local communities wanted people in their area. We did some special questioning on social distancing or physical distancing just before tourism reopened, the 1 metre versus 2 metre considerations, for example. All very interesting stuff. I'm not going to share that today, but it's all there if you want to look at it. And then we also looked at the impact of local lockdowns in August, particularly the lockdown in Aberdeen, which at that time was very much in the news. And then, of course, we wanted to look at, well, what the Scottish staycations actually look like during July and August. So we've got some data on that we can share. And in particular, how their expectations, to the extent to which they were met. And then in the final survey, we also looked at what people are planning on next year. Can't cover even a fraction of that today, but what we can do is just give you a little flavour of some of these findings, if I can get this to. There we go. So just some of the findings. This one here, don't worry about all the detail, but at the top of the chart, in August, we asked people the extent, how they felt about taking travel and tourism and holidays at the moment. And what we did find, even as late as late August, that a big chunk of the Scottish population are still very nervous about the whole idea of travelling anywhere, or going anywhere and taking holidays anywhere. 25% would rule it out completely. 33% would only consider Scotland. 31% would only consider other parts of the UK. And 11% said, well, I'm happy to go anywhere. Tended to be the younger ones. And there's details, below of how that varied by demographic. What we discovered in August was that around about 53% of Scots adults had either taken or were seriously considering taking a 2020 staycation. 13% had already done so, 10% had booked one, 4% were planning one, 27% were still thinking about it, and only 47%, just under half, were ruling it out for whatever reason. And again, we've got the reasons for that, and I'll share them with you. So if all that comes to fruition, you're looking at around about 2.4 million trips, not making up for all the ones that we've lost from people not coming from overseas or from down south, but certainly helping to keep some businesses going during the summer months at least. We asked the 47% why they decided not to take a staycation in Scotland. Was it because they were going somewhere else? Well, the answer to that one was almost categorically no. They weren't choosing somewhere else. They literally weren't doing anything, weren't going anywhere. A large proportion of them weren't taking a staycation because they were realised that as far as they were concerned, the virus was still around. 51% of them saying that they weren't going to go anywhere while the virus was still around. 12% price reasons, 9% happy taking day trips, staying local, 5% waiting for next year, and so on and so forth. And then we also, just a flavour of the sorts of questions we asked people back just before tourism reopened about, what their considerations were. 3/4 would consider a Scottish holiday during autumn and winter, which was good news at that time because it showed that we didn't have to have all our eggs in the summer basket. Now, obviously, things have moved on with the pandemic since then, but back in June, that's what they were saying. 82% were willing to go off the beaten track, not just stay in the hot spots. 68% wanted to support Scottish tourism, and 96% claimed they would respect local communities. However, the downside and the other side of all of that, in July, 63% said they would only visit places if most places were open, and 80% would only visit places approved for hygiene. So around COVID-19. So obviously these were important considerations. I'm just going to show a couple of slides on something which I think is interesting. This was in August, looking at the extent to which people's expectations were met by the experience. We asked people how important a whole bunch of reasons were, or a whole bunch of factors were to be realised on a Scottish holiday. You can see there right at the top, hygiene and cleanliness and accommodation, places visited generally were very, very important for everybody. We then asked people, and I realise you didn't get the chance to read all of that, don't worry, we'll share this afterwards. We asked people who'd taken a Scottish holiday, well, how satisfied were they with each of these things? And good news is that hygiene and cleanliness generally did get very high standards. That was very important for them. But other things appeared as being things that people were very satisfied with that they hadn't necessarily mentioned before. And when we actually plot all of this on this slide here, so this is satisfaction. The further to the right, the more satisfied, the further to the top, the more important it is. So things in that top right-hand green box are the things that people said were important and they were very satisfied with. That's obviously important. So hygiene and cleanliness in accommodation, hygiene and cleanliness in places visited generally, the quality of your accommodation, and the attention paid to physical distancing in indoor locations, all very important and generally high levels of satisfaction. There was only one item really that went into that top left-hand box, things that were very important, but satisfaction was a bit lower. And that was number 5, the behaviour of other visitors and tourists. People had a little bit of concern around that, some people not observing the rules and so on. But on the more positive side, we see number 12 at the bottom, things that people didn't say were important, but actually were very satisfied with, were in particularly the welcome provided by locals in the destination. There was concern that they might not be welcome. They felt they got that welcome. And there's lots of more detail on that chart, and really just a chance to give you a flavour for it. I'll hand over to Duncan now just to talk you through the transport information we got in June.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, in June, we asked a question to understand to what extent people were feeling about travelling via different transport modes during a future trip when they were able to do this again, because this was before the reopening of tourism. On the left, you can see the proportion of people who were, as we called, non-rejectors, people who would normally be able to or would use this form of transport in any circumstances. And amongst these people, we asked them to what extent there'd be any, compared to normal, compared to before COVID-19, any more likely, less likely, or grey bar in the middle, no difference from before. And then we've ranked these in a kind of net gain or loss ranking, really basically taking the mores, the lesses away from the mores. So what you can clearly see here, and this is reflecting these concerns Jim just talked about, people worried about hygiene, other people, crowds. People are most likely to say they're much more likely to travel in their own car, sort of traveling around in their own bubble, essentially. Also, though, whilst in the destination, particularly walking and bike cycling increasing in demand a lot. And we also saw this when we asked questions about the outdoor activities the activities people would like to do. Outdoor pursuits had risen greatly in demand and interest amongst many people who wouldn't normally do these types of outdoor activities. Campervan also, we hear a lot about, wild camping and traveling around in campervans and so on. And there was an increased desire to use that type of transport. Bottom end of the scale, though, however, you can see a very different picture. Types of transport where people are together in close proximity. Also types of transport possibly used by those groups of the population who are most concerned, maybe older age groups, for example. So organised coach tour, travelling by plane, regular bus or coach, you see the greatest decrease. But then kind of in the middle, we've got more of a mixed picture, which, for example, 70% of people saying there were no difference in their likelihood to travel by ferry, 52% regarding train. So there is a bit of a spectrum. A lot of people saying, well, they could imagine how traveling by certain modes of transport that might not have an impact on them. So a lot of detail in this, which we've just sort of flown through in our presentation just now. But we would be keen to share more. You can go onto our website and download all of the reports, videos, etc., for covering all of the results. And also, as Jim mentioned at the start, we'd be very happy to discuss, share, present this to any other audiences in more detail. So thank you for your time. I'm going to now pass on to Mike, who's going to talk a bit about the North Coast 500.
Thank you. Now, at the moment, my screen share is disabled.
Oh dear, it was working 2 minutes ago, wasn't it?
Yes, why is that? Okay, just try again, screen share.
Yeah,
Yes, here we are.
now,
Thank
right.
you.
Strangely.
Fine.
Alex and Jim and people can confirm it all ran smoothly before you guys all came in.
It did, and in fact, I'm afraid I've missed almost all of what is said because just as Alex and Jim started, my system collapsed. But anyway, I'm very glad to be back here now. So can everybody see that screen okay?
Yep, I can see
yep,
it.
that's fine. Okay. So this was an attempt at the North Coast 500 that we did using public transport back in September last year. Obviously, I'm not going to take you around the route because trying to do 500 miles in 10 minutes, it would be a speed of about 3,000 mph, I reckon. But that's the route for people who don't know it. And it's essentially a road route around the north of Scotland. But it is possible to do part of it by rail. So the blue lines here represent the rail lines, the far north line going up to Wick and Thurso, and the line to Kyle of Lochhouse here. Oops, sorry. We used the train for those sections and then other forms of transport for other sections. Notice up here Helmsdale, because that will just get a mention at the very end of this presentation. As I say, I'm not going to provide any tour of the journey, but that is available on that website. The link is there. We did try and make a bit of a sort of publicity event of this because we did want to encourage other people to consider doing the same tour. So we commissioned Nigel Sutherland to do this picture for us, and we got approval to use the North Coast 500 logo as part of it, and we did get some publicity in the local press. So the main points to say is that we've been aware for some time, talking to local people around the North Coast, that the North Coast 500 has been almost too successful with camper van congestion on single track roads. And certainly there are places where all the local community sees and benefits from the tourists is just a row of camper vans parked up at night and then waste disposal problems the following day. So part of what we were trying to do was to look at a way in which tourism might benefit more the local communities. And we did feel that traveling in the private vehicle, you see the scenery, but you don't really meet the community at all. Whereas for public transport, you do that, and you also hopefully contribute to those rural services which are struggling at the moment. And I mean, I'm speaking now in the days before COVID. And of course, there's the CO2 issue as well. And the context of this, of course, is that the population in the North Highlands is showing a decline. Whether these figures will work through to 2041, I don't know, but that's the trend at the moment. And of course, using public transport, traveling light, all our provisions and accommodation purchased locally. And also we were trying to develop some of the ideas of slow tourism. So it's the travel experience rather than just the views, we felt. And our travels certainly did enable us to see how rural bus services were a lifeline to non-car owners in remote areas. And just pull out one example, Durness Bus runs just a once a week service from Thurso to Durness. And so really all our scheduling had to be based around catching that once a week service. But it was a fascinating service to travel on because it went off route many times to drop people at their front doors. And whilst the driver was taking that person in and settling them down if they were elderly or infirm, we of course had a chance to chat with other people on the bus. So if you want a fast featureless journey, don't use public transport. Other things that we found during our travels. Taxi firms are going out of business. There were two of them, that one of them had actually gone out of business and the other was about to go. And part of the reason, or in fact the entire reason for this, I think, is the level of regulation that these lightly used services are subject to. So here you can see some of the expenses that the taxi driver has to fork up before they can legitimately run a taxi service. So £800 before the additional insurance, put that into the mix as well. That's probably £1,000 a year that any taxi driver has to pay before they take their first fare. And you can see that you've got to get a lot of fares over a year to just recoup that sort of outlay. Uber. We talked about Uber to various people as we went around, currently operating only in major cities, as you know, but will it extend to rural areas? I think it's an open question at the moment. And it seems unclear whether such a scheme will contribute positively or negatively to rural transport. It's something that I think is still uncertain. And then community transport. I mean, we were hoping also to make the most of community transport as well. But other people on the line may have more information about this than I do. But my understanding is that most community transport vehicles have a Section 19 permit, which just allows them to pick up people in the local community, and they need, sorry, that's a Section 22 permit, and they need a Section 19 permit to act as a local bus service. And obviously the requirements, the regulations for that type of license are quite a bit higher. If you have a Section 22 permit, then you can ask people to make voluntary contributions to travel, but how far you can push that, again, I think is an open question. Post buses once were part of the lifeline to the Highlands. As you can see, in 2003, 220 post bus services serving remote locations in the UK. By 2009, down to just 5 routes in Scotland. And I think the very last post bus ran in 2016 between Tongue and Lairg. They are still running in other European countries. I think if my information is correct, you can see the 5 countries that still have some sort of post bus service. And there seems to be a dispute as to how and why the post bus service came to an end. As you can read there, the Royal Mail blames the Highland Council and the Highland Council blames Royal Mail. But it's a sad thing that that type of transport has now come to an end. Could the increasing concerns about environmental and climate change enable a reintroduction on the most remote routes? I don't know. I mean, it's something which obviously should be looked at and reconsidered. So I want to end, because I know time is very brief, in just sort of outlining 8 recommendations we came out of our tour with, in the hope that other people might consider this type of travel. And of course, all this is happening pre-COVID, and I am the first to admit that COVID has really been quite a major setback to encouraging people to take this form of transport. But hopefully that is something that we will work through. So, I mean, I have been talking to the North Highland Initiative and unsuccessful yet, but saying there should be at least some sort of tab on their site for people to pick up information about how it could be done using public transport. A few years ago, my wife and I did a tour of Switzerland by train, and we found that a company, Swiss Holidays, had a very efficient tailor-made service. So you could say where you wanted to go, roughly how long you wanted to spend in each place, and they would then do all the working out of the timetabling on your behalf and say, right, here's the journey set up for you. And so we're suggesting that there could be a similar opportunity for someone for the North Coast 500. I suppose I'm a bit of a timetable geek. I don't mind sitting down for a few hours to work out a journey involving bus and train whose times are not coordinated or integrated. But for some people that would be tedious and would be, I think, put off. And once you've learnt how the thing works, you can much more quickly start planning journeys for other people or other varieties of travel. So I think that is a possibility. And I mean, you've heard this cry before, and I'm sure you'll hear it again. There should be greater coordination between bus and train. I mean, just to give you one example, you can leave Wick at 6:18 by train and get to Inverness at 10:35. You can leave Wick 2 minutes later on the X99 bus at 6:20 and arrive at Inverness at 10:04. Now, how crazy is that with such few buses and trains running during the day to have two, in effect, doubling up with each other? And of course, to go even further, to have some sort of combined ticketing would be even better. That does happen, as you can see, on a small scale in other places, but I do recognize there are difficulties there. So really just to have a more integrated timetable of the different transport modes would be a first step. And it would be great if there could be some way in which licensed community transport organizations could advertise their times at which they were able to travel, so there's a lot of funnel tourists into fitting with their schedule and to maximize their seat occupancy. There are several dial-a-bus schemes in the North Highlands, but currently quite a few of those are available only for residents. And again, if these could be made available for tourists, that would be a benefit to everybody, I think. And certainly having a sort of dual tariff system so that the tourists paid the full economic price and in effect subsidized the residents' cheaper travel would seem eminently sensible. And if post buses are not running, then there are regular deliveries throughout remote communities in the Highlands now by supermarkets such as Asda and Tesco. And these tend to operate a book a slot system, so you know it's going to come to your village on a Tuesday afternoon, say. So it's only a small scheme extension in principle to adapt vehicles and to have fare-paying passengers on a delivery round. It wouldn't be fast, of course, but it would at least get people there who otherwise might be completely unable to travel. And I mean, it also raises the point that seeing an Asda van and a Tesco van arrive in the same place within half an hour of each other does seem singularly inefficient. And to have some sort of common carrier that could provide a service for all such doorstep deliveries, again, would seem to be sensible. I think part of what we're saying is, are there ways in which tourism can help local communities who are struggling, particularly with their transport? And so, for example, if, as I know it does, the North Coast 500 generates some funds through selling merchandise and maps and so on, if some sort of contribution could then be made to local communities to help them with their transport, it would recompense them for the inconvenience they have with all the tourist traffic that the NC 500 concept has generated. And again, something which has rather fallen apart because of COVID, but we were trying to encourage the North Highland Initiative that has responsibility for the North Coast 500 route to bring together all the transport operators, tour organisations, and those interested in promoting the scheme to look at whether some sort of integration of transport, of tourist and local community needs could be combined. So I think if there's one single message, it is that public transport in remote areas is more viable if it serves local community and tourists, and anything that can be done to get both using the same transport system is clearly going to benefit everybody. Now, I said that's the last word. It's not quite the last word, because you may remember at the very start, I said, just look out for Helmsdale. And I would just mention, and this is a flagrant bit of publicity, that I've also been involved in setting up a community project here, where the old station master's accommodation has been converted to holiday accommodation, and any profit goes to local community causes and also to promoting the Far North Line. John Wilson is on the call, will know all about this. So in fact, we do offer a 50% reduction staying here for anyone who is tackling the North Coast 500 by public transport. So if you're tempted, then don't forget to spend a night or two at Helmsdale on the way. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. Thank you indeed. I have to say, what Mike didn't tell you was there are some glips along the way, with there are areas where you can't get public transport, and hitchhiking and taxis are a requirement. And the other thing I haven't said is that for those of you that haven't heard me do the presentation before, there's also very big gaps when it comes to doing the North Coast 500 by bike as well. So we actually have some really big transport challenges in the north of Scotland that don't just serve the visitors and the residents as well. I'm going to hand over in a minute to the questions and answers, but you're all used to Zoom by now, and you all see cats coming in about. Well, I've been told by my son to give you a tiger, and the tiger's not coming in. And I have to give you the tiger as a wee puppet, because just down the road from us is the Highland Wildlife Park. And although it's only about 5 miles from Aviemore, you can't get there by public transport either. So when you're talking about tourism and transportation, at the moment, the focus is very much on cars, understandably. But when you look at some of the chat here in the side, Martin, do you want to just unmute yourself? Because the camper van thing is genuinely a big issue, and as Duncan and Jim know in the Cairn Gorms, it's been a massive issue as well. Do you want to just unmute yourself, Martin, and explain what you've been working on? Martin, have you gone? Has Martin disappeared? I can't see Martin. He must have disappeared. The camper van issue, and Duncan, Jim, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I mean, actually what I can do is share a slide on the impact on communities, which I think might, it doesn't answer the question, but it might be quite interesting just to add a little bit of context to it. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Apologies, folks. Try and work out how to do this. Because I mean, basically what we did find, let me just share my screen, sorry. do this one here.
If anybody watches any of the farming sort of programs in Scotland, the camper van issue has really been discussed a lot recently.
Now, can everybody see?
We
Yep.
can see it with the
Yep.
notes, yeah.
With the notes?
Yep,
Yep.
with the notes.
That's
Right,
fine.
that's the wrong.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm on the wrong slide. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh.
Technology.
Not well prepared at all. Here we are. This is the one we want. Right. Right. So I got the notes on it as well, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Never mind.
we can
Never mind.
see the slide.
I'll show you. I'll just put all the data up. We asked people in August the extent to which the communities they were in, the extent to which they wanted tourists in their area. So this is a much more general answer to the question specifically on camper vans, but it does show that there is an element of resistance, if you like, amongst a lot of communities towards idea of tourists. This was very much during the August period, with 9% of Scots totally comfortable and ready to welcome visitors from anywhere now, 32% fairly comfortable. And then at the other end of the scale, however, we had 33% who were either had a number of concerns would only want a very small number of local visitors, or would prefer no visitors coming at all. And you can see actually when we look further down how we break that down by areas of Scotland, actually the resistance was interesting. It was highest in the rural south. So the likes of the Borders, Dumfries and Galloway, maybe a reflection of proximity to England, where obviously the rules were slightly different. Well, they still are, but where things were slightly different back in August. And there was a desire to protect these areas. So on the camper van issue in particular, Duncan, I don't know if there's,
Yeah.
I don't know how
and that these results that you can see are particularly in relation to COVID-19 and the big fears were around infection, etc. But I think we've seen prior to all of this, obviously, over tourism and camper vans and etc. Another piece of work we've done actually just recently, and it's published again, it's worth having a look on for Nature Scot, which is a new name for Scottish Natural Heritage, is looking at the impacts in terms of people being outdoors, doing outdoor recreation. And we did some work in September where people had taken visits to the outdoors. We asked them about issues they experienced, and one of the ones that was really quite high was relating to, well, a lack of public toilets, but also the flip side of that, unfortunately, litter, human waste, etc., wild camping. And we saw about a third of people saying during the previous 4 weeks they'd encountered these. That's really high levels, just while out and about walking, etc. So I think it's all kind of related to that issue where we went from a period of lockdown where everyone, certainly our survey showed Scots were very keen to get out, but to rural areas, everyone was seeking to escape other people, but in doing that they all went to the same places often and ended up being large crowds of people. And and as we saw on the slide I showed, camper vans was one, and traveling by car increased in demand because people were scared about using public transport more than previously.
Well, I see Martin's back. I can now see Martin. I don't know where he went. So I'm just going to prime Linda Bamford. Linda's got a few questions, so I'm going to unmute Linda, or she can unmute herself once Martin's spoken. Martin, introduce yourself first, because I know you, but everybody else
so
doesn't.
Martin Higgett Associates. Sorry, you've made your views about men and multitasking to me before, but I was trying to look at the EST website and then I couldn't find the Zoom stuff to unmute myself. But yeah, I mean, doing a few studies recently, one on the in Arnside and Silverdale in an area of outstanding natural beauty, real bad feeling about camper vans coming in parking all day. We know that in some places, some of the Scottish Highlands, the camper van brings all of its goods with it from the mainland and then spends very little in the local shops, etc. But as I said, that BBC article yesterday, it seems that trend of people wanting to do the camper van experience seems to be growing. So if it is, I just wonder whether there's mechanisms, because I imagine that quite a few camper van owners are probably aware of the sensitivities they cause and probably do want to do the right thing by the community. So if there's ways of bringing in some more revenue by actually having formal parking spaces, and then I'm not sure whether it's a sort of a protocol or sort of advice to try and encourage them to use the local facilities and so forth. but I think we need to try and find some way of working with them.
Yeah, I think there's been well, I know for certain there has been a request put to Fergus Ewing MSP that there's actually some look at making a strategy for camper vans and motorhomes for Scotland. Whether that actually gets actioned or not, there has been a request, and I do know, and Duncan might be able to tell me if I'm wrong, but there is a Scottish Tourism Task Force, which many of you may be aware of, that are due a publication, and Ranald's nodding his head, due a publication shortly. So I don't expect to see major revelations in it, but there might well be the odd golden nugget in there. And that leads to Linda, actually, from a golden nugget point of view, because I'll get Linda to explain her background, but accessibility, whether you're in a camper van or a car, or whether you're trying to access the trains, are all big issues. So Linda, do you want to just introduce yourself and also your questions?
Thanks, Jenny. I'm Linda Bamford. I'm the convener with the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland, which is a non-departmental public body, and our main aim is to give ministers, Scottish ministers, advice in the travel and transport needs of disabled and older people. There was a couple of questions came up for me, but before I go on to them, I'm also a camper van owner, mainly because I'm a wheelchair user and I've got accessibility needs, and when I want to do things like the North Coast 500, my accessibility needs aren't met in terms of accommodation, accessible toilets, and it's a lot easier for me. But we are also, when we do our trips, we're very conscious of the local economy and always make sure that we top up our spends when we're in the local areas. We don't bulk up and drive through, we stop and add. And I think I've seen some stuff coming through under the tourism from last year, where they were looking at better infrastructure for camper vans, which would reduce some of the wild or off-grid camping, so to speak. Some of that's already going in at the ferry pools in Skye, but they're looking at putting in charging points and waste disposal units. There was a fund allocated to it, I can't remember it off the top of my head. But a couple of questions that came up for me there was, when I was looking at the stats, just to understand them a bit better for me, was the numbers that were behind the stats, and were these local people or business owners, or did we catch tourists going through for their opinion? And I suppose the other thing that jumped out with my equality hat on was discounts for accommodation if you don't use public transport. Most disabled people in that area can't use public transport, so it seems a bit as if they're being kind of pushed aside and not benefiting from the same discounts. Sorry, I know that was a few questions, but
fine. I'll start with Jim and Duncan, and then we can go to Mike.
Yeah. On the numbers, it was a survey of the Scottish adult population. So some of these people are tourists in Scotland, but generally speaking, it's a representative sample of Scottish adults. We spoke to just over 2,000 across the summer, 500 each time. So it's a fairly standard size for that type of survey. And the result, especially when you're looking at the results on a national level, they're pretty robust. So, but
I'm interrupting, but you did do some of them where you compared with England as well, didn't you? You got some of the data from England.
We had some separate data that we got from Kantar, actually, on some work they'd done, which was a separate survey completely. But the Visit Scotland have been doing a survey over the period with the other national tourist boards, looking at sort of consumer sentiment more generally. But that survey, it's more at the UK level. I mean, it is possible to look at Scottish level analysis, but it's a smaller sample basically. So it's over a longer period and slightly different questions that are asked. But I would encourage anybody who's interested to look at that. It's certainly available on the Visit Scotland Insights website.
Fab, thank you. I was going to hand over to Mike now to answer the rest of the question.
Well, yes, my comment, Jenny, would be we would certainly want to emphasise that trying to use public transport is not for everybody. I mean, certainly not for people who have physical disabilities, certainly not for families with young children. It is just one of a range of options travelling. I think the other thing just to comment on is of course, there are two problems with the camper vans. I mean, there's the congestion and providing the facilities for waste and so on, which are required. But having spent quite a lot of time at Helmsdale, for example, I've been on an evening walk down to the harbour there and have seen up to 15 camper vans parking. And when I've asked local people, you know, the camper vans are here in force, they say, oh yes, but there is absolutely no benefit for us. They bring their own food, they just walk in the area, but they don't use the restaurants, they don't use the pubs. So we're providing a facility for this mode of transport. 90% of people, they reckon, using it don't benefit us in return at all.
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about caravans all day. We could probably have a cafe about caravans and camper vans, but I'm conscious of time and it's 18 minutes past 11 and we always try and do these bite size to be 11:30. So 11:30 is where we're sort of aiming to finish up. I know that Alex Reid has asked the question, what happens to the Durness bus when it's not in operation on the Saturday? Mike, can you just quickly give a 2-minute what the Durness bus does, please?
Yes, the Durness Bus Company, which is based in Durness, not surprisingly, is a sort of family affair. And they operate, I think, about 10 different routes and tend to service each route on a different day in the week. The Durness Bus does run along the North Coast on other days apart from Saturday, but it's only on Saturdays that it goes right through to Thurso. On other days, it tends to, as it were, stop short. And it obviously relies on sort of bringing people back into Durness. But they are a remarkable company in that because it's just a husband and a wife and an employee who drive the buses, they know all their passengers by name, they know where they need picking up, where they need dropping off. We really were most impressed with their outfit. And I have to say, most worried about how they're going to fare during COVID, because they were only just making ends meet before the epidemic started.
Well, interestingly, for the convention, for those of you that were there, the day one we had a workshop about is COVID-19, a accelerator for rural mobility, and we had a big discussion for an hour, to be honest, about yes, no's. So you'll get a report on that in due course. But I think personally, actually for some of these organisations, it's an instigator for collaboration and hopefully an opportunity. So I'll keep my fingers crossed for them. With 10 minutes to go, I'm going to quickly pass to Ranald, our tourism guru that has been at every single cafe that we have run since May, I think it is. So he is our guru. So he's going to quiz you all now. Go for it. No pressure, Ranald.
No pressure, Jenny. No, thanks. I'll tell you what it was. It was just when Mike had mentioned there about, or during this presentation, about almost being too successful with camper van congestion and single track roads. And I was just curious, and anyone can input here, as to kind of what level of analysis there's been in respect of single track roads, road widths in the Highlands, and the level of traffic on those roads. And I noticed just in the kind of chat, if you like, Alex is a geospatial professional as well, so maybe he's had some kind of input into that. But I think sometimes the visual representation of some of these challenges, you know, we don't always have in tourism or indeed kind of transport. So I was just kind of curious as to people's thoughts on that, and if they do know if that exists currently.
It's actually a good question, because you've not just got the North Coast 500, believe it or not, you've got the Northeast 250, you've got the snow roads, you've got Route 666, and I'll just keep going and going and going. And these are all routes that have got really small roads. And personally, I don't know the answer to this. So if anybody on the floor does, unmute yourself just now and put your video on. And if you don't, then it shows that it's actually something that we need to go back to various organisations to find out. Mark Selby, do you want to unmute yourself, because you've just put something in the chat?
Yeah, hi there. So by way of introduction, I'm with Project Beyond Consortium. And one of the things that's fascinated us, the work that we've been doing, is looking at congestion on roads, particularly single track, and this astonishing desire to increase the width of those roads, when in fact the problem is the vehicles. And it seems insane that no one has advocated introducing taxes for width of vehicles. And you only have to look at a 2018 Mini Countryman and compare it with the size of an initial Range Rover. And the Mini is over 2 meters. The Range Rover was only 174 wide. And so just on bring the tax, but I wonder, could I just raise one other question? Yeah. One of the other things we've been looking at is certainly this post-bus question and the fact that we've got an existing infrastructure, but somehow in so much of our thinking, we seem to be focused on stovepipes of freight and people, passengers and freight, when in fact they're using identical infrastructure. And I'm really interested if anyone on the call has got any more insights with regard to what happened with post buses and why they were stopped. I really appreciated Mike's raising this earlier.
I'll jump in. For those of you that don't know me, I also do a part-time PhD, and the area I'm looking at is rural mobility as a service. And the key point for me, and it's sort of linked them all back together from today, is actually utilising all the assets that we have on the road as well. So that you're looking at the services for goods and for people. So whether somebody's going to go and get a prescription, or sure, whether you're wanting to get an Amazon delivery sent to you rather than it being an Amazon locker, which is in Inverness and that's 30 miles away from you, whatever it is, it's about the utilisation of the assets that we've got there. And how do you, and it picks up on Mike's comment earlier on, how can you utilize, and we're all visitors at some point in time, visitors spend per head to be able to offer the services to rural areas. And interestingly enough, I'm just writing a journal paper at the moment, and I was told to do it on COVID, and it's, you've got to think about the fact we do have this deurbanization happening as well, where there's a trend of people moving from the urban areas to the rural areas, which will probably skew at some point Alex, Jim and Duncan's data, because that set of people bring with it a different skill set, a different set of expectations and assumptions that they could get a micromobility scooter from somewhere, or hire a bike, or be able to get a bus every 10 minutes because that's what they've been used to, or be able to just pop down the road to pick up some carrots for their dinner because they've run out of it. These things are changing, and that pressure is going to be changing within a rural environment. So it actually all comes together. And I've been talking about a post bus for probably about a decade. I think it was 2017, Mike, rather than 2016, but we'll not split a year between friends. But I think COVID actually is that opportunity to bring those goods together along with the people. So I wouldn't say it's dead. I just think it might be an emerging model that rekindles as a result of COVID. So watch this space is what I would say after my ramblings. But anybody else is willing to interject, please do so. Terry, go for it.
I eavesdropped on a couple of community council meetings on the Isle of Mull during the COVID lockdown. They are ever so much more accessible when you don't have to travel for an hour to get to them. You just have to click a link. So that was a good one for local democracy. But I was fascinated that they mostly talked about camper vans and public toilets. So your throwaway comment about maybe we could have a bigger session just about camper vans, take it seriously. Well, we're in the position on Mull that we are subsidising camper vans to come to our island using road equivalent tariffs. They contribute little to the local economy. Let's teach people who use camper vans to reverse into passing places before they're allowed on an island. Get them to reverse onto the ferry. The idea of taxing them because they take up so much room, not a bad idea. I wouldn't want to ban them because I may go on a camper van expedition myself one day. Had somebody here last week who's doing the Northwest 500 right now. Yeah. But I think it's a hot topic and it isn't going to go away. I agree with you about post buses. They've got a potential future as well. But the post office is a different beast now than it was 10 years ago. So I don't know how easy it would be to get dialogue about the public interest.
Interesting that they're now offering to collect your parcel, isn't it, from your house? So there might be scope actually to be able to bring them back into the fold. Mark, do you want to quickly say something before we conclude?
Just a very quick one. In just looking at how you have post and tourism together. One of my best experiences was on Vancouver Island out in Canada, where wanting to go whale watching, one of the ways of going whale watching was to go to the post office. And when you went to the post office, as a seaplane was actually used for all the deliveries locally, you would go in there and see how much they were carrying, and the price of going on the seaplane was determined by how much post was being carried. So 3 visits to the post office in one morning then meant we went out on the round. And I tell you, as a tourist attraction, it was phenomenal. If that can be introduced in Scotland, it will be brilliant.
Well, I was standing in a laundrette just the other day, and I'm in Cairngorms, and obviously it's busy with visitors coming to the area, so lots of laundry going to the laundrette. And guess who dropped off the dirty laundry from a self-catering property? A post lady. And she's been doing it all lockdown, and she said, I'm not going to swear, but she did swear that this was the last delivery that she was doing because it was an absolute pain in the backside. So there are ways and means of utilising. I just think there needs to be a bit of a buy-in here. And this is probably a bit of a different session to what Jim and Duncan were expecting, but it just shows you what people are looking at and what their focus is at.
Yep. One final point, actually, just to say about camper vans. I did notice during the summer that most of you will be familiar with the Perthshire Caravan Company, the huge, they've got a huge warehouse between Perth and Dundee, basically off the A90. They were saying that they sold more camper vans in 1 month, I think, than they had done in the previous 5 years. And of course, the thing is, people who bought these camper vans, it's like a dog. It's not just for Christmas. They're going to be using them for the next few years. So it's actually a really serious conversation. I mean, there needs to be some form of strategy around how best to accommodate them within the tourism infrastructure.
Yep, totally agree with you. And I think you've just nominated everybody here to be doing a camper van series in the new year. We can find out what happens, and Martin can maybe share some of his findings and thoughts by that point in time. Go on, Martin.
Very, very quick one. There was a guy on Tyree who was looking at getting the best out of this by actually reconditioning and electrifying some camper vans and then renting them so that people could turn up without a camper van, but then enjoy the camper van experience. So I think there might be sort of mechanisms and ways of making sure you get the benefits from them and not just all of the problems.
Yeah, very quickly, I noticed Linda had a hand up. Sorry, Linda. Do you want to quickly say something?
Yeah, it's just very quickly. When we were doing the North Coast 500, when we came down by Ardmere, we went into one of the local shops just to pick up bread and milk and that, and they actually gave us a discount voucher for the campsite, which meant we went to that campsite as well. So that actually worked well for both. If people knew if you go into the shop and spend some money, you get £10 discount in your campsite, and then the campsite guaranteed your business. So just very quickly, that worked very well.
Fab, thank you. I think, Linda, I might be roping you into a workshop, into a cafe, as it were, a workshop in the new year. So I think we need to make sure that this stays on the agenda. You might be wondering why unusually Jenny is making sure that it isn't an hour-long bite size, because usually we keep chatting. Jenny is actually part of the OECD International Transport Forum Working Group on rural transport. And guess what? I'm meant to be chairing a session right now at 11:30. So hence the reason I'm being short and sharp, but I will share with you the ITF findings in due course. But just to say for your diaries, next week we have an open cafe, so we can talk more camper vans. We can do whatever we want. There is no subject matter. You just come along with coffee, cake, or yogurt, or your personality. It doesn't matter. That's 10:30 till 11:30. Then the following week we're going to be looking, and this might be quite interesting to everybody, of hitchhiking. Mamba is a European project that's just finished, and they've had a whole pilot scheme, and it's been run by an organisation called Resopunce. And as some people will know, it's not the easiest of organisations to get hold of, Resopunce, because they don't speak a word of English. So unless everybody's French is really good, it could be quite challenging. But I've managed to get the coordinator of the Mamba to come along to speak to us about hitchhiking. And I do think it probably would fill the gap on quite a lot of rural transport, particularly, as Mike probably would have told you, he would have had to hitchhike had he not managed to find a wangle for part of the North Coast 500. So that's going to be the 6th of November. I have to thank Fuse Mobility, who have supported us for this cafe and also for the 6th of November cafe. Everything's coming together quite quickly, and hopefully in the new year we'll have some exciting information to share with you on the future of SRITC, which links kindly to the survey that Alex has put into the chat. For those of you that are at the convention, I know people get fatigued out with surveys, but please do spend the 5 minutes, because it's going to help us steer where SRITC is going and what we can do and how we can help people going forward. So I think that's about it. If I've missed something, I apologize, and it's probably to say thank you very much to the people that have spent time speaking today and helping to make today happen. We will share this recording, and we can share everybody's contact details and get the slides if you want to have a chat further with any of the speakers. So I think that's it. I better rush off to join Tunisia, Africa, America. It's phenomenal, this ITF rural workshop that we have, and over and out.
Thank you.
See you later, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.